Okay, so we're learning Likkutei Sichot Volume 2, Parshas Korach. We actually started yesterday, but there was no transmission because my phone was out of a battery. So we're picking up from chapter 2. First of all, you didn't send it. You did? Okay, so I just didn't have time to turn it into a video and upload it. God willing, I'll do that today, tomorrow, someday. So what did we see in chapter 1? We saw that the best part should go to God. And what does it mean that the best part should go to God? So in chapter 2 we saw that this also applies to time. That the best part of the day should be dedicated to godliness. And we said that later on, I think it's in volume 31 of Likkutei Sichos, the Rebbe learns this from Cain and Hevel. Right? There's a lot of times that he learned this idea. It's a very central idea to his thought, that the way a person should conduct himself, especially today, it used to not be that way, 100 years ago. People were not always late. People were on time. The reason they were on time is because they did far less. And so there wasn't this tension all the time, wasn't this pressure on them. But now that there is pressure, if you don't dedicate the first part of your day to Hashem, then you won't have any meaningful relationship. And so you have to dedicate this first part of the day, as he says, to Hashem. Lefichach. So now he's coming, and the last thing he said was how the Friediger Rebbe explained this in relation to his revered father-in-law, explained this in relation to the mitzvah of Chala, where the Torah says, "Reshit arisotechem tikhu tarimu truma laHashem." Chala tarimu truma. That the beginning of your dough, which also can mean the beginning of your bed, meaning that the very first moments after you wake up, and these first moments are not 2 or 3, but rather they should last about 120 moments, something like that, 2 hours, should be dedicated as chala, as something that's given as a truma, as a tithe to Hashem. Lefichach. So we're at the end of page 34 on the right side. לפיכך בשעה שנדונו במדינה זו ארצות הברית סדרי הלימוד בישיבות, עמד הרבי בתוקף על כך שאך ורק לימודי קודש יתקיימו בבוקר. That's why in Jewish day schools in America, when they had to design the structure of the day, so it became customary, and the Rebbe was very adamant about this, the Friediger Rebbe, that the first half of the day should be dedicated only to Torah. ולימודי החול and the secular subjects יתקיימו במחצית השנייה של היום. Should be in the latter part of the day. שכן בבוקר שהמוח נמצא במנוחה ורגוע הוא הזמן המוצלח ביותר. Because the morning hours when the brain is calm and it's rested, these are the best hours. כפסק הרמב"ם, as it says in the Rambam, כל חלב להשם, that the fat, the best part, has to go to God. ורק בהמשך היום אפשר לעסוק וברכך השם אלוקיך בכל אשר תעשה. And only then, in the second half of the day, can you begin to look at this other part of serving God, which is called, and God will bless you in all that you do, which is also, this is such a beautiful way to say it. You don't come and say, there's secular subjects. It has nothing to do with God. Says, no, the secular subjects also, they are part of fulfilling the means by which Hashem will bless you. עניין זה אמור גם לגבי בעלי התעסקות, או בעלי עסקים. I don't know why they say התעסקות. This is also true about people who have a business. למרות שעוסקים הם בעובדין דחול, even though they're dealing with mundane matters, עליהם לדעת שהעיקר הוא תורה ותפילה. They should know that the main thing is Torah and davening. Learning Torah and praying. וראשית ומבחר הזמן של היום יש להקדיש להשם. And the best part of the day should be dedicated to Hashem. בראשונה יש להתפלל. First you need to daven, ואחר כך ללמוד, and then you need to learn. כפי ההלכה, as the halacha says in Shulchan Aruch, שמבית הכנסת יש ללכת לבית המדרש. And from the shul you go to the learning hall. You go to the base medrash. ורק לאחר מכן לאכול פת שחרית. Only after that do you eat a morning meal. Okay? And by the way, eating a morning meal is a big deal. Pat Shacharit. There's a whole series of letters between the Rebbe and his father, that his father scolds him about not eating Pat Shacharit, about not eating after he comes back from learning. The Rebbe, when he was in his 30s and 40s, when most of the correspondence occurred, he used to fast almost all the days. And the reason he fasted, he writes in his father writes it. His father spills the beans. His father knew I was fasting, and he told him that he rebuked him. He said, "Don't do it, because it's not going to help." Why was he fasting? Because they had a series of miscarriages, and the Rebbe was trying to do tshuva for it. And his father writes to him that that's not the way to go. Very interesting letters. The Tzemach Tzedek writes in halacha, in his shoot, in his responsa, that you eat the pat shacharit, the morning meal, after davening. So the question is whether you eat it right after davening and before you go to learn, or whether you first also go to learn. So he says there's a halacha that says that from the shul you have to go directly to the study hall. So that's how he's amending the Tzemach Tzedek's psak, and he's saying that you actually have to learn something first. Definitely after age 50, this is the way it should be. You shouldn't be eating before 10, 11 in the morning. There's no reason. You should be fasting from 5, 6 in the afternoon before. Otherwise, the body can't clean itself. At least that's what our current understanding of the body is. And it was very common back then. They used to eat something when they came back home from work, and they only had 2 meals. So the second meal was in the evening sometime. Let's say it's 5, 6, 7 p.m. And then they didn't eat. They didn't have fridges. They didn't have any way to take something or preserved food like you have processed food today. So they didn't have anything from their evening meal until the next morning meal. So it's at least 13, 14, 15 hours between these 2 meals, which is why it's called a break fast, right? Because you're breaking the fast. It used to be very common. Today, because people have refrigerators and they have what do you call it, a pantry, when they stuff fill with all kinds of food that keeps, so they wake up in the middle of the night and they want to eat. What are you doing? You're killing yourself. Why are you doing that? You should be fasting at night. In any case, יש לדעת שהעיקר הוא תורה והתפילה. The most important thing is the primary thing is Torah, learning Torah, and davening. ולא להיות שקוע, even the people who have businesses, לא להיות שקוע בעסק וללמוד רק פרק אחד שחרית ופרק אחד ערבית כדי לצאת ידי השולחן ערוך. You shouldn't be just learning one section in the morning, one section in the evening, only to be fulfilling your obligation according to the Shulchan Aruch. לומר מילים מבלי שהאדם ישמע את אשר הוא אומר, to say words without listening to what you're saying when you're davening, ומבלי שיתבונן בדברים שהוא שומע, and without listening to what when he's learning what other people are saying to him, you have to be focused. מיטב הזמן, מיטב הכוחות. If you only dedicate a short time in the morning and a short time in the evening, your mind is not there. Your mind really has to be preoccupied with your learning. So מיטב הזמן, מיטב הכוחות, the best part of the time and the best part of your faculties, יגיע הראש ואפילו יגיע הכפיים צריכים להינתן לתורה ולתפילה. Your efforts should be concentrated on Torah and davening. אמנם נאמר לגבי תרומה שעליה להיות ראשית, ששייריה ניכרים. There's a halacha by Truma that when you say Rishit also means the first part. What does it mean? What does that mean then? That you should see that there was something left over. There need to be leftovers, or some kind of nothing. But it's part of the halacha. So there's a lot of reasons why in Chassidus the people would jump after the Rebbe's sheirayim, his leftovers after he ate. One of them is because we understand that the Rebbe is eating, hopefully, if he is a real Rebbe, when he's so since he's sustaining the body to serve Hashem, that's called Kodesh LaHashem. Everything is dedicated to Hashem. It's like a truma. So his food is like truma. So what's left over is fulfilling this halacha that Reshit means that there should also be leftovers. The beginning means that there must be an end. So the end is like the leftovers. וכן המעשר חייב להיות עשירית בלבד. ולפי תקנת אושה הרי אל יבזבז יותר מחומש. And when you're talking about Meiser, not Truma, you're talking about Meiser, right? Truma, the difference between Truma and Meiser. Truma doesn't have a set amount. And it could be 1 in 60, 1 in 50, 1 in 40. But in any case, the Meiser has a set amount. It's 10%. And according to the Takana of Usha, after the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, the second time they were in Usha, they made a Takana. The second time the Sanhedrin was in Usha, they made a Takana that the one who spends his money, what is he spending on? Tzedakah. He shouldn't give more than 20%. Why? So that he doesn't become poor himself. And 20% is not from the profits, 20% is from the Karen. How do you say Karen in English? The principal, right? So you can't give more than 20. There's all kinds of questions. For instance, when you inherit money from someone, from your parents, do you have to give 20% again? 10%, 20%, whatever you want to be knowing. What? Why? Yeah. Why would you? My father already gave 10%. Okay. So that's what the Maharal says, the Shla says. He says, it was a question, it's in the Achronim. Nobody thought about it before because nobody inherited anything, I guess. So it became a question in the 1600s. So he says, that even though this money was already meisered, it was already given from, still, now it's yours. It's a new story altogether. It says when you receive that inheritance, you have to give 10% also. From the principle. Ach nosaf lechach, from the prophets, there's no question that you have to give. Ach nosaf lechach שהאדמו"ר הזקן אומר שבאשר להצלה לא גרע רפואת הנפש וכל אשר לאיש ייתן בעד נפשו ברם אין כאן עניין הצדקה לפיכך אף כשרוב היום מוקדש לעסק ורק מיעוטו לתורה ותפילה מהווה עם זאת המיעוט את העיקר של כל היום ולכן צריך הוא להיות החלב. So he says, even though there are limits on this, on how much truma you give and how much, since truma is no different, it's at least, giving tzedakah, is at least the same thing as saving yourself. Because when it comes to saving yourself, you're allowed to give whatever amount you want. Okay? So he says, if it's that way, then how can you fulfill this with your time? So he says, the way you fulfill it with your time is that you fulfill it with the quality of the time. What is primary in your life? How do you know what's most important in a person's life? What does he dedicate his best to? And if he dedicates the best hours of the day to Torah and davening, that shows that even if it's a small part in terms of quantity, in terms of quality, right? This is opposite from the Sichot we learned a little while ago about quality in our generation being quantity. Here he's still saying that when it comes to time, there's only so much time that you have. There's only 24 hours in a day. I can't give more than what there is. So how do I make it so that it's really the best that I can give? That you give the quality hours. And it should be the fat of the hours. I mean, the fat is the best part, the morning hours. ההכנה הכללית הנדרשת לכך היא קבלת עול. The general preparation needed for this is to accept the yoke of heaven. מיד בקום האדם משנתו יאמר מודה אני בקבלת עול, וצריכה להיות ההנחה שכל החלב להשם כאמור, והדבר חשוב גם מבחינה גשמית כאמור לעיל. So the way you do this is when you wake up and you say Modeh Ani, and you say it the way that the Lubavitcher says it, right? Like the Frierdiker Rebbe said to say it. And how do you say it? You put your hands together. And it's very strange because it's like it's a goyisha thing. Where did you get this from? So I saw a question not long ago. Somebody asked Rav Yitzchak that they don't want to teach their children to do this because it's such a goyish thing to put your hands together like this and say. So he said to them, that's your hang-up. So you don't have to do it. If you feel that for you this is like mimicking the Christians, so don't do it. But for your children, it's they don't know anything. They've never heard of this. And it's a normal human, basically what he's saying is that it's a normal human way of pleading, of supplication. And so, like accepting that I'm subservient. But we need to know that the biggest problem that a modern Western person has is to admit before Hashem that I am your servant. Very, very difficult. And most people will keep mitzvot and do a lot of things, but in the end, we're equals. You and I, Hashem, we're equals. I have just as much to say about myself as you do. I'm not your servant. Certainly not your indentured servant. So it's very difficult. How do you know somebody's really understood fully the meaning of Torah, and at least according to Chassidus? It's when you see that they're willing to do this. When they're willing to say Modeh Ani this way, with their hands together, and like a servant before his master. It seems like something very external, but it's not. It really cuts to the core of what it means to be a human being. So anyway, this also, he says, has implications for your physical well-being, as was explained. Chapter 3. Korach chalak al ku'unat Aaron. Korach disputed like you said, the beginning of the Sichot, disputed Aaron's claim to being the priest. הוא טען שאין צורך לתת כל חלב לכהן, שכן כל העדה כולם קדושים ותוכם השם ומדוע תתנשאו. So it says very interestingly, he says, it's not just that he said Aaron shouldn't be, I should be. That's the way it's usually understood. He's saying no, what he was contesting was what happened at the end of Baal Oscha. It's very interesting. In the Medrash, the Baal Shem Tov writes like this. He writes, what did the Medrash, let's start with Chazal. Chazal say, what did Korach see that he disputed Moshe and Aaron? He saw tzitzis. No, he saw tzitzis, it says. He saw the tzitzis, and then he suddenly had a question about the tzitzis. Okay. So it's a strange question. It's not so halak. It's not so glat. Like how do you get from seeing the mitzvah of tzitzis that Moshe Rabbeinu just gave at the end of Baal Oscha, and that causes you to dispute the whole relationship, the whole hierarchy? Why? So one possible answer is because in the tzitzis, all the threads are equal. Maybe you got the idea of equality from there. Maybe. But this explanation is much better. Because it says, what did he see? Also at the end of Baal Oscha, Shlach, why am I saying Baal Oscha all the time? At the end of Shlach, we also have the mitzvah of giving challah. We also have giving it to the Kohen. We also have the nesachim, which are also given to the Kohen. We have all these things that are given to the Kohanim. So that's what he saw. That's what Korach saw. He says, why is Aaron getting the fact that he's serving in the temple? That's hard work. I don't need that job. But why is he getting all these perks? That troubled him. So he says he shouldn't get all these perks. Why? Because we're all equal. Why should you get it and not someone else? Let's give it to the poor. Why are you getting it? What's so special about you? So it's a very glatt way of understanding how Korach is related to the end of the Shlach. So that's what he said. Kol ha'eda kulam kedushim. Everybody's holy, and Hashem is in all of them. So it says to dedicate something to Hashem, you could give it to any Jew. What's the difference? ישנה טענה שאפילו שלא בשעת העיסוק בתורה, הרי הכל ביעשרה שינתא שריא, וזאת אף אם לא יעסקו בתורה. So there's this simple idea that resonates from this idea that Korach says everybody's equal, that when there are 10 Jews together, even if they're not learning Torah together, the Shekhinah, the divine presence, is upon them. So there is merit to what he's saying. Akol beyasra shrinta sharia. On every 10 Jews, the divine presence is dwelling. ואף ליחיד ישנה הרי נפש אלוקית. ואפילו לקל שבקלים ורשע גמור יש נשמה. שהיא בבחינת מקיף. Here also the Shechina is in makif also. But it says, even one individual, he has a divine soul. And even the simplest, the lightest of Jews, even the total Russia, they all have a divine soul. Even though it's in the surrounding light, meaning it's not conscious for them, but they have it. לפי זה, הרי בכל מקום שהוא הולך, מתהלך עם הנשמה ועם השם. ואם כן, מדוע תתנסו? So if we're all equal in those respects, and so we're actually rectifying Korach by saying that every Jew, the beginning of the Tanya, by the Arizal, it wasn't like that. You have to know that in Kabbalah, not every Jew has a divine soul. That's the big chiddush of Chassidus. You didn't know the Chassidus started this. That's why Chassidus, after Chassidus, it could be democracy in the world. It couldn't be democracy before Chassidus, because even in the Arizal, he says every Jew has a divine soul, but what he means is he has a glimmer of it, and it's really not pronounced. It's certainly not conscious. So to make it conscious, it's a long 25-level road, if not 125 stages that you have to go through, and maybe if you're a big holy person, when you're 70, you'll have a divine soul. Okay, that's how the Arizal builds it. By the way, if you walk into any of these popular Kabbalah places, that's all they know. They haven't heard of Chassidus. So what do they tell you? Oh, you have to pay this much for this stage, and this much for this stage, and this much for this stage. Okay? Yeah. It's like the joke about the guy who walks into different places and wants to be a Kohen. And then he asks him in the end, so why did you want it so bad? It's because my father was a Kohen. That's exactly what happens with Chassidus. It's like the first thing you learn in the Tanya, very first page, like the other side of the first page, he says every Jew, doesn't matter how holy, not holy, evil, it doesn't matter at all. We all have a divine soul and an animal soul. We all have a divine soul. How did that happen suddenly? That's a big chiddush from the Baal Shem Tov. So the Baal Shem Tov was not saying that there's no stages in it, but he's saying that those are immaterial. They're not relevant to the very fact that you have a full divine soul. When does it start entering? Sometime when you were like 5 or 6 years old, maybe even 2 years old. When is it fully present? When you're 13. And you start putting tefillin on. You have a full divine soul. So we'll see more about what he says about this, God willing, tomorrow. So we're actually rectifying Korach. In that sense, Chassidus is a rectification of Korach. Because that's what Korach said, we're all equal. But even in the Arizal's picture of the world, we're not all equal. Some people have more of a divine soul and some people don't.
Korach obviously studied the...
Chassidus, there's no question.
What's his name?